All right. Well, here we are on the hour. Welcome, everyone. Uh, it's another Tuesday night education series event, and tonight we have Sam Tischendorf with us from Blizzard Technica, and we're super excited for this topic on getting the boot fit right for that up and downhill boot. That boot that's got to do a lot more than just your Alpine resort boot. So, super excited for her expertise and sharing this with us. Um, Let's see, a few things really quick about the Zoom function. I have the chat turned on so you can all chat with each other. And if you want to share links or just comment back and forth with each other, that's what the chat's for. We'll keep an eye on it too, and I'll be in the chat as well. But any Q&A, any question that you want to elevate to Sam's attention, please put that in the Q&A. And if it seems right, I'll elevate it to her attention. And if not, I'll sort of group them up at a time when it's good to ask questions. But yeah, Q&A for your questions for Sam and chat for each other. And without further ado, I will hand it off to Sam. I'm going to pop out of my share.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ron. All right. Hi, folks. Thanks for having me. I'm Sam Tischendorf. I've worked with Blizzard Technica for a little while, doing some product R&D, talking a lot about boots. I'm boot fitter, podiatrist, so all things feet are definitely in my wheelhouse. I'm going to share my screen. We just tried it. It was working. All right. So this evening, we're going to kind of have a little chat about selecting the right boot for you in terms of touring boots, what you might want out of a boot, a couple of little Technica based boots. And then I'm going to go through a couple of things that I think are pertinent to those either looking to purchase boots or that have maybe had some issues about boots in the past. Um, in the end, what I will talk about a little bit is I'll probably default a lot to ski boots, but for those of you knuckle draggers out there and like snowboarders, a lot of this stuff is certainly interchangeable between ski boots, snowboard hard boots. So do not feel that you're being left in the dirt. It's just a case of my language just often defers to ski boots, but I started out as a snowboarder, so I totally get it. Okie dokes. So going in to see a boot fitter, 10 out of 10 would recommend. We can do a ton of reading online to try and decide which is the correct boot for us to use. But the boots that are written about, the people who are writing about their boots, and I am one of those people who do a lot of boot reviews, it's not your foot. And what you like in a ski boot, what you want out of your touring quiver or your boot quiver, it's not necessarily what you read as golden. I can highly, highly recommend allowing yourself an hour to 2 hours, make an appointment, go and see a reputable boot fitter that friends of yours have had a really great experience with, and go in and chat about boots. Go with an open mind, and also a little bit of a criteria as to what you do want in a boot and what you don't want in a boot as well. Dipping into a little bit of product here, starting off with the Technica Cochise. This is a boot that's kind of similar, say, to the Lang XT3, the K2 Mindbender, maybe the Atomic XTD series, the Ultra or the Prime. These are kind of your workhorse boots. These are a great entry level boot that you might maybe look to. They're a little bit heavier in mass, and the range might maybe be a little bit reduced. But these boots typically come across as being a really awesome, like all mountain, all activity boot. They have pin binding capability. Often they come in with a grip walk sole. So they can kind of work across a couple of different binding types as well. The focus I find with this kind of class of boot is that it's great for hiking in bounds at the resort. It's great for some ski touring, but because you're carrying a wee bit more weight, you might find it's a little bit more cumbersome as you start to get a little excited of going touring in the backcountry a little bit more. Um, Often these boots are kind of built with a little bit of beef, and stand the test of time. we'll often see a lot of our patrollers in something like a Cochise boot. There are replaceable parts, so from buckles to straps to heel and toe pieces. It's what can make them a little bit heavier. A T-nut and bolt is actually a lot more expensive and a lot more heavy to have in a boot compared to a rivet. But this is an awesome criteria and class of boot if you're starting to noodle around with the idea of maybe sliding uphill. Um, some people like to think that this class of boot is dying because maybe the touring world is slowing down a little bit. But I certainly still sell a ton of these just because of their versatility. Next in our Technica lineup, when we're starting to go a little bit further into the touring boot phenomenon, is the zero G touring boot. So the Tour Pro, the Tour Scout, these are similar to your Scarpa Mistrale, your Dynafit Radical Pro. These are boots that have a higher cuff, say, compared to some of the other really specific lightweight touring boots. But these are like a full rockered touring specific sole. So you do have to be careful of your binding interface with these boots. But they are lightweight focused, but they charge downhill super well. So you'll often see these boots being skied on the resort, but also by people who like to do some side country laps. Maybe they're doing some bigger spring tour missions where, you're spending 6, 7, 8 hours on the skin track or hiking up and over things with crampons on, doing very silly things. And you want your ski boot to perform because of all that effort you put in. Maybe not 100% the lightest boot out there, but the range of motion that you're getting with a boot like this, the fit and the function, particularly I find with this zero G boot, it fits a really wide variety of feet. It can be stretched really well in the forefoot for length and width. And the new zero G boot, if you've got an old pair, this new boot actually has a lot more kind of instep capability to it, which one makes it so much easier to get on. Those of you who've maybe had this boot in the past, it's an absolute bitch to get on. Excuse my language. But it's so much easier to get on now, but still has that same kind of skiing performance. So that is a boot that honestly, in the retail environment, and when we're looking at injecting kind of funds into like product development and looking at boots that we want to put effort into on the market, this boot really flags a high portion of the market for us. So this is the zero G. It is my personal favorite touring boot. I've actually had mine for about 4 years, and although the line is packed out, what I can gain from it, skiing between the resort and the backcountry, fits my criteria pretty nicely. For those of you who are wanting to go further again, a little bit more nimble in your desires for what you need to be able to do with your foot while you're maneuvering over rocks. Maybe you're someone who aspires to do a Jim Morrison and ski off Everest. Maybe you are someone who, come springtime, is hiking up and over all sorts of things, multi-day trips. The zero G Peak boot and the Peak Carbon. This boot is kind of on the cusp of the world of randonnée. Those crazy skimo races. Some folks will use this for skimo racing. It's a little taller in the cuff than your traditional skimo boot, but this brings to it some super high performance and really lightweight. It feels it at a 26.5. It's under the 1,000 gram or 1 kilogram capacity. So from a weight perspective, you feel like one of my old customers who'd bring his Newton meter with him into the shop when I was working on his touring boots. Every gram mattered because he was a medic on big tours. This boot is going to fulfill that lightweightness. There's a ton of range of motion with this boot. You're really getting a lot more uphill focus here, though. The ski down in this boot is super surprising, and it really does charge from this class of boot criteria, which I put it up against like the Atomic Backland Carbon, probably the Scarpa F1 LT. with that boa at the instep and the Solomon Mountain Summit. This boot is super lightweight. It skis really hard, but it does sit a little higher up on the leg. So just as a comparison with maybe some of those other boots out there, this boot here sits a little higher, which does mean the lever arm and the moment arm that the leg is getting some resistance from is a little higher, which makes it ski a little bit more assertively. Um, but from like the Technica, when I wear like my brand hat right now, this is like the super cool, super fast user. If you were to be, say, a randonneur racer, or your priority is just skinning really fast up and down a ski resort for exercise, this is going to fit the bill really, really well. A new boot coming out next year is going to be the Technica Decoy. I kind of think of it as a hybrid between the Cochise boot and the Zero G Tour Pro. You're getting a really lightweight but high performance, high charging boot. It comes at a 130 flex in the unisex and comes all the way down to a size 23.5, which for petite footed hard chargers is the criteria that we really want to be filling with this. In terms of the women's specific model, it comes up to a 115, but in all honesty, I think it skis a little higher than a 115. You're probably looking at closer to say, I would say like a 120 with the plastic compound. The shape of this boot is super anatomical. For those of you who've got like a little bit more width through the forefoot, it really kind of accommodates that metatarsal parabola pretty nicely, with a little toe wriggle space, and some really good heel tapering. We kind of say that this boot has about 15% uphill criteria. I would say you could probably push it up to 25 to 30% uphill user, because it is just so much more lightweight and it's so much more kind of versatile in its fore and aft movement. But what kind of slows it down, I suppose you could say, is the custom adaptive liner that's in there with like that, what Technica to have the liner with all the dots on it. That adds to the performance, but it also adds to the weight of having like a really strong liner in there. One thing to note with this boot when it does come in, it's a full welded sole. So similar to your Solomon Shift Boa that's out there, that's a full welded sole. Similarly, your Atomic Hawks Ultra XTD, that's a full welded sole. So be careful about if you're someone who really likes to kick rocks and like chew up your boot sole a little bit more. These you can get them replaced. There's a gentleman in Vermont who does full Vibram sole replacement on ski boots, but it is a little bit more effort. So that's my only caveat with this. But this is going to be a really cool boot to kind of come into the world of hybrid touring boots, to encourage people to keep touring, but to feel like they're really supported and hard charging on the way down, from all that effort. So that's kind of me with my very Technica based hat on. But what that's to say is when you're going in to see a boot fitter say about what kind of boot you're looking to purchase, have an idea and have like a realistic conversation with yourself as to like, okay, how much am I going to be really going uphill? What is my priority? What is the class of boot that I'm going to be wanting to be in? Especially in the world of snowboarding, you know, you might want to start to be going on longer missions, and that's where something like a hard boot can come into play. A guide that I spend a lot of time with, she rages on a hard boot, and loves it and just finds, her foot can be so much more comfortable because there's a lot more that you can do with the hard shell. Also, kind of the security with the pin binding setup for touring, can certainly be appealing. Whereas I've got some other folks who are high level athletes, either for Jones snowboards or whomever else. And even though they'll go on like big touring missions, they still really like to stick with their soft boots. So who am I to judge? Pick your poison, but be aware that there's a little bit less that can be done from a fixing standpoint, to a soft boot. So as it starts to pack out, there can be a little bit more frequency of replacement through here. Yeah, so that is some boot breakdown. In the end, in kind of every type of footwear that you do athletic pursuits in, be it running, be it riding bikes, be it skiing, the most important factor, I think, when you actually get dressed for these activities, is your sock selection. Um, the sock is the interface between your body and your foot. And if you are wearing the correct sock, it's going to make a really big difference to your general comfort, and the potential for blisters and how much you perspire. So, a starting point is to decide, are you going to be a little bit more environmentally friendly and go with something that's like a little bit more of a synthetic sock, or maybe you're allergic to wool? Or do you prefer a slightly more natural fiber as well? So there's a bunch of different socks out there, and I've certainly spent a lot of time trying them all. And I'm going to say my personal preference is a natural fiber, but with a little bit of grip. Labent has made some Pro Series socks that have this kind of silicone at the heel, which helps to reduce heel slipping, and a little bit of grip in the upper cuff as well, that keeps the sock in a really set position. Socks can shift when you're touring. They're going to be the thing that wicks moisture from your body, so your perspiration from doing physical activity, into the boot. The liner is actually designed to absorb that moisture. And so picking the right sock makes a really big difference. Cetus actually has some really cool technology called grip yarn, and it is a silicon wrapped yarn. So it's a piece of like your regular polyurethane fiber that is wrapped in a silicon, and it is weaved into the sock. Again, this sits just above the heel, to act as reduction of friction, because although we can do everything under the sun to try and reduce our heel movement while we're sliding uphill, um, having a little bit of grippiness with either the yarn or some like silicon pieces, can really help to reduce friction, and reduce the presence of blisters. Because if anyone is like me, every start of the season, I end up with two giant blisters on the inside of my heel. Um, One thing I like to be a little wary of is this sock in particular. Sorry to pick it apart, even though it is one of my favorites. There's a ton of yarn cuts, because of a really rad pattern on this sock. Unfortunately, yarn cuts can create a little discomfort and a little bit more friction up against the skin. So although I really love the grip at the heel, this can give me a little bit of shin irritation. But one of my things that I don't necessarily love with this sock with the grip yarn is that it's a synthetic material. So again, pick your poison. Another thing to think about is like maybe just going with your favorite alpine sock, something that's really thin, even, and consistent all through particularly the foot part of the sock. Um, Descent makes this really awesome sock that is challenging to put on your foot, but it has a certain level of compression. And because of that level of compression and some of the yarn as well that sits around the heel, you're getting a ton of reduction in friction again. But with that compression, your circulation is working a little bit better. Your foot's not swelling quite as much either. And so from like an athletic recovery standpoint, a sock with a high elastic content that's a little bit compressive is certainly a cool like thing to think about. If you've started having a few issues in your boots, have a long hard look at your sock wardrobe and see if you can maybe make some changes there or maybe make some improvements there. So that's my little spiel on socks. The next factor is the case for the custom insole or the drop-in footbed. This is a long and arduous conversation that is always worthwhile having with your ski boot fitter. As someone who has made custom orthotics, custom insoles from a variety of different brands, the way I view it when I'm working with my customers is that they are a tool for fit. Yes, they can kind of come across as a little bit of an upsell, but for me, with my clientele, if someone comes in and they're complaining of some friction or they're complaining of black toenails, I'm going to look at what someone's foot mobility is and make a bit of a suggestion towards whether or not they need an insole or not. There are certainly feet out there that do not need an insole because they're neutral in their nature, and what I would give to have a foot like that. But I am super mobile. I need a lot of support. I need a lot of structure. I also like to have an insole. This is one by Cetus that has a little bit of cushioning in the forefoot. So when you're having those long days sliding, that your met heads can get a little bit irritated. Sorry, I should hold my foot here. Your met heads can get a bit irritated. So having a bit of cushioning underneath the met heads with your insole, again, keeps you out there a little bit longer, right? Um, an insole is also designed to keep you in a consistent parameter inside the boot. When you're in a consistent position, it's going to reduce the potential for friction and injury from that perspective. It really helps with power transfer, and also for because skinning in particular is so much more dynamic. As our foot warms up, our foot actually loosens and lowers. So having a little bit of that structure is going to keep our foot in its more natural position, reducing that foot splay, reducing some irritation on the toes as well. Someone who is like me, who's super flexible through the mid-tarsal joint, if you use an insole, it's going to greatly reduce the potential for those blisters that can occur on the inside portion of your heel. 9 times out of 10, when I see people for touring boot refits, it's because they've got a ton of blisters through the inside of the heel there. So the insole is definitely something that, it's not for everyone, but I find it's a really great tool to help to fit boots a little bit better. We can actually use them to make a little bit more space in the boot, or we can also use them to take up a little bit of space as well. We can create a deeper heel counter. So chat with your boot fitter, get them to explain to them either why they do or they don't recommend an insole for you, because it really can be such a positive thing to have in your touring boots in particular. Which leads me to talking about kind of the thing that I find really interesting about fitting touring boots is kind of the biomechanics that the body goes through on the skin track. There is no real research out there that I've been able to find because I really like looking at evidence-based practice and why things certainly happen. But over the years, and a little bit of this has come from my own experience with going touring, is that this probably happens a little bit more with women than it does with men. But when we start to look at the biomechanics of what the body goes through on the skin track, it's completely different to our regular gait cycle or walking pattern. This is maybe something that you've thought about, or maybe you haven't. You might maybe have found at the start of each winter season when you start your ski touring missions, be it skinning up a resort or starting to go on little tours, you may notice initially that shift in your musculature in your body. All of a sudden, you may be getting a little fatigue through your hips, maybe a little achiness through the back of your hips. Your glutes are certainly starting to fire a little bit more and fatiguing a bit quicker. And often people's hip flexors as well can start firing a little bit more and feel a little less comfortable when we start getting into skinning. And one of the biggest reasons that I've kind of worked out from this perspective is that for majority of us who are moving through the world, biomechanically, we're what's called abducted in our gait. So if you imagine yourself walking on the beach sand, there's probably about at least 75% of the population who has a certain level of abduction, which is your heels in and your toes out, as it were. You might be someone, say, who pronates or supinates, but the general shape of the beach sand behind you is kind of this V shape. Now, if you can imagine trying to walk with skis or a split board in this abducted position, one foot's going to need to go all the way out to the right, one foot's going to need to go all the way out to the left. and you're never actually going to make it in a straight gliding position, right? An idea for you the next time you go for a tour is to try and actually ski tour with your feet a little bit more abducted, or the complete opposite of being internally rotated. Those folks who sometimes will say they're a little pigeon-toed, they're going to experience a similar kind of biomechanical issue as well, that instead of being a little bit more abducted, they're coming in. And so if you imagine trying to slide forward in this crisscross position, what's going to happen with the tips of your split board or your skis? They're going to cross. Similarly, if you're in this abducted position, the tails of your skis are going to cross over and the tips are going to go to the outside. So when we're actually on the skin track, our body goes through a full biomechanical change of the gait profile to make us more parallel. And it's a completely unnatural position for our body to be in. And because of this is why we start to see more issues with friction and blistering in ski touring. So it creates a pronated foot, or a foot that rolls in, to roll in significantly more. There's a lot more kind of then friction through the heel. The toes tend to do a little bit more gripping as well in this parallel position. And then all of the musculature higher up the chain also has a really big effect. So in the long and the short of it, something like an insole actually helps you to be a little bit more comfortable when you're forced into that parallel position. But hopefully this gives you a little bit more understanding as to why sometimes we can just never get rid of those blisters that occur on our feet. And it's because as soon as you take your boots off and you're in normal shoes, you're able to walk and hike in that normal kind of abducted or internally rotated position. Not a lot of us are mobilizing in this parallel position. And so hopefully for a few of you, be you boot fitters or super interested in how your body actually works, this just gives you a little interesting pearl of thought to think about when you're on the skin track, as to like why it takes your body a wee while to get used to the biomechanics of skinning and skiing for the season, but why we can also see some recurring foot issues. What we'll also often find with folks in touring boots is the development of a tailor's bunion. Even if you've got like a perfectly normal foot, the tailor's bunion, which is that six toe bunion or that pressure point on the metatarsal joint at the baby toe, that can be a high area of friction. And some of that comes from how the foot moves when we go from abducted to parallel. Hopefully that's been an interesting pearl of information to take into consideration with thinking about fitting your ski boots and the fixes from that perspective. So these are my little thoughts here on how we can actually prevent these tragic blisters from occurring. That's my foot up in the top right-hand corner. I had to take like 10 days off skiing, even in my regular alpine boots, and kind of cruise around in some very soft shoes this year, because I am the car mechanic that does not work on their car. I'm the boot fitter that tends to not work on my own boots. But I had a big kind of body change in the last 12 months with like an injury and some other kind of rehab, and I never changed what was going on in my boots, which is a warning to all of you, or a little bit of a thought to all of you, that if something has happened with your body over the summertime, say you've taken up a new activity, or you went from being a recreational cyclist to like a near professional cyclist, or whatever it is that your body has been through, have an understanding that coming into the next winter, your feet could possibly have changed. Our bones are consistently changing over time. Our muscles are consistently changing over time. And ski and snowboard boots are such a fixed footed sport, but such a fixed shaped shoe that's hard, that we're just, those shoes do not change over time. It's more that our body changes over time. So don't be afraid to go in and have like a little boot fit review with your boot fitter if you've had some big changes over the summer season. Or you're going to end up like me, who has to put a ton of tape and band-aids and be in soft shoes for about 10 days. So one thing that I always try and do at the start of my touring season is if you are not allergic to kind of band-aids or plasters, I will actually use some zinc oxide tape. Leukotape, elastoplast tape is something that I can highly recommend. It adheres to the skin way better than your average sports tape. It's got a little bit of elastic to it, so you can actually stretch it and pull it around the heel. But in the long and the short of it, I highly recommend putting a strip of tape around your heel to reduce potential for friction. If you're someone who, say, has some clawing to your toes, maybe you've got some hammer toes, I would start out the season with a little bit of moleskin on those high pressure points so that you can prevent rather than have to cure some irritation on toes, on bunions, or whatever else. Always keep moleskin and a small pair of shears in your backcountry backpack. The amount of time that I've either had to share my scissors or my moleskin with friends because they forget to pack something like this, especially on those first like 1, 2, 3 tours of the season. It's an amazing product that can be really really helpful. But if you start with say something like the Leukoplast, even if you've got KT tape kicking around, that's really not a bad substitute if you don't want to kind of invest in a new type of tape or your skin's a little hyperallergenic. But starting out with some fresh tape on your heel each tour that you go on is going to be helpful. If you're someone like me who tends to perspire a little bit, or you're going to be going out for a really long mission and just want to do a little preparation, coming from previously Colorado, a lot of friends got stuck into doing the Grand Traverse, which is absolutely wild in my eyes, or like the power of four, whatever it is that maybe you've got a training goal for. Using something like Fry's Balsam or TB Co, which is like an aloe based, it's very old school compound medication, but you can just get it from a pharmacy. It's not something that's even over the counter. It's typically on the shop. But applying this ointment directly to your skin, it'll turn your skin a little bit yellow, but it's quite tacky. And I like to apply a little bit of this to my skin before I adhere my tape on. And I find as someone who perspires or is going to spend a long time in my boots, I'll actually apply this to my skin before putting the tape on. So the tape stays secure. My skin is just that much more protected from friction or like kind of allergic reactions as well to the tape. But also, if it gets to a point that I have maybe developed some blisters and I have to wear a really cushioned band-aid on a blister area or on like kind of a breakdown over a bony prominence, if I apply a little bit of this TB Co, I can have my tape or my band-aid actually stay in position. I don't know if any of you have experienced when you've gone out touring and you think you're doing the right thing by putting some tape on your foot or a band-aid or whatever else, and it slides out the way, and the issue becomes 10 times worse. Using some old lady Fry's Balsam is not going to go astray. Another thing to think about, just to reiterate, always think about the socks that you're in. If you've found that one pair of socks always creates blisters, say farewell to them, keep them for like regular alpine skiing, or give them to someone you don't really like, and they can deal with friction that comes with the socks. Also, always keep your long underwear up and out the boot. You want to keep your long underwear at that upper cuff level or completely out of the boot. That's going to reduce friction and like pressure areas around the ankle, any seaming or the like. Just keep everything other than your foot and your sock in the ski boot. Okay. A couple of other common scene issues, or something to maybe some little extra pearls before we go to some question time to think about from a boot fitting standpoint. One thing that I have noticed from a trend perspective, and this is not bagging any boot manufacturers, is that a lot of touring boots seem to be getting a little wider and a little deeper, which is great because it means we start to open the fit criteria for feet that haven't always had a good time in a pair of touring boots. But what that means is that I'm actually finding a lot of clientele are coming with a boot that's way too loose around their foot. Ensuring that when you're working with your boot fitter, they do an instep perimeter measurement. So that's the measurement that kind of looks at this kind of ankle joint hook position and ensuring that they're not putting you in a volume of boot that has too much floor to ceiling height or too much space in the heel. If you've got a really narrow heel and a really low instep, you might be needing to get your boot fitter to push you into a lower volume boot. Trying on boots is the most challenging thing to do. So having a good relationship with your boot fitter, but having them understand the particular biomechanics of your foot, knowing that you've got a low instep or a high instep, that you've got a wide heel or a narrow heel, what kind of the parabola is like at the front of your foot, what your goals are for ski touring as well. Are you someone who falls between two sizes? Are you going to be someone who is out there skinning for a really long time that your foot's going to swell and that maybe it actually is justified that you go into the bigger rather than the smaller size? Or maybe you're just mostly doing side country missions and you still want to have that alpine performance feeling, that maybe you go into the smaller of the two boots rather than the bigger and they push out the length of the boot. One of the great things with, say, being in pin binding situation is we can actually gain a lot of length in touring boots if you're not putting them into a typical toe piece binding style. I can't think of the right terminology right now, but we can actually, if you're just going in mostly with pin bindings, we can gain a decent amount of length by doing a stretch in the forefoot. So have these discussions again. Don't be like, oh, I'm going ski touring, I have to be in a boot that's bigger. When your ski boot is bigger, you're chasing a moving target. You're that pencil in a cup situation where you're just sort of rolling around. And if we're starting to have to add a bunch of material to a touring boot to make it fit and feel so much more compact around the foot, that's when materials shear off, they move into the wrong place. And again, you end up either with like weird numb points, friction areas, so on and so forth. So think about the volume of the boot, think about the general fit of the boot, but again, balance that out with what kind of ski touring you're actually going to be doing. A really common thing that we see are people coming in with black toenails. And there are a million and one reasons as to why people can have black toenails. I developed my annual black toenails because I was doing a rescue drill course and we were running in our ski boots and our skis with skins on them, doing really fast timed digging beacon drills. And it meant that I had absolutely zero worries about what was going on with my feet and how I was on my skis. I was so focused on my task at hand that I just was smushed around in the wrong place in the boot. And because of that, my toenails kind of bled and went black. Black toenails can also be an indicator that the boot's too short. Let's be honest, they can also be an indicator that you may be skiing in the back seat because that can happen in a ski touring boot. Ski touring boots are set a little bit more upright from an angle standpoint, which can mean that you feel like you're actually skiing further back, which you are from a math standpoint. And then throw a backpack with all your gear on the back. Folks you'll see will often ski a little bit more in the back seat. And so it can be kind of an indicator that maybe your boot is a little too short and you need a little length in there, or that maybe you just need to work on your technique, especially skiing with a backpack on, that you need to be a little bit more forward. Even though you've had all the length made, and if it keeps on happening, that can just often be an indicator. When we're skiing in the backcountry, a lot of us are skiing a little bit more conservatively, which can be being a little bit more upright or a little bit more back. Which is totally understandable, but don't let it be an issue and get your boots worked on. If you're doing a ton of like flat walking or flat skinning, or if you tend to be a bit lazy and not move your risers down from being in an upright position, again, what that does is that it causes your foot to plantar-flex more in the boot. And as soon as we start to plantar-flex a ton more in the ski boot, that's going to push our toes to the front of the boot a little bit more. That's a pretty common thing to happen. And let's be honest, every now and then we've all had a moment of skiing in hike mode, either on purpose or not, or one versus the other. That again puts you in that more backseat position, creating those black toenails. Um, Ski touring boots are a challenging beast. One of the ways that manufacturers can kind of cheat a little bit, maybe, is to make a really thin liner, which weighs absolutely nothing, because we're really trying to focus on the mass of the ski boot. These liners can pack out pretty quickly, which is another story. But because they're so thin, they can actually be quite cold. And if you're someone who's doing a lot of alpine starts, you are spending days, maybe you're doing some like backcountry camping, because these are not highly insulated, frostbite can be a real thing, or other kinds of cold reactivity, be it like your rainouts goes on crack for those of you who experience rainouts, or whatever else. I personally have a circulation issue in my feet, and this is my touring insole. And I actually use a boot heater in my touring insole. I do not use the Bluetooth capability of the battery. I use the Thermic brand that comes with Bluetooth. I do not use the Bluetooth when I'm touring because of the interference with my beacon, and I won't necessarily use my batteries on long days, just because I don't feel super safe with the batteries on. But please know that there is this delightful boot heating system or heated socks that you can use. For touring, do not use hot toe packets. They will move in the wrong direction. They'll create your feet to sweat, which will then actually make you a lot colder. It's going to adjust your fit in a negative way. Rather invest in a decent set of boot heaters or heated socks if you tend to be someone who's a little colder or you're just going to a super cold environment. Um, our feet can change pretty significantly over the touring season. This image that I've got here of the foot is a friend's foot that this is his mid-season positioning of his foot. He gets out and ski tours in some capacity every single day. And his bunions get bigger and they break down. So we have to have like a standing foot date, as it were, to ensure that I go through and adjust his boots for him as the season progresses, because his foot changes given he goes from like being in flip-flops all summer long and not really wearing shoes because of the job that he has, to then shoving his foot into his ski boot, which is the appropriate width, it's the appropriate depth, it's the appropriate length, it's all the right stuff. But because he's just spending so much time in those boots, he just develops these like bone bruises and like bone breakdowns. So consistently, spending time stretching, punching boots. One thing I will say is the nylons that are used in ski touring boots, they certainly are tricky to stretch. Have patience with your boot fitter. They'll probably want to keep that boot overnight, because we can only stretch them in a low and slow capacity. And over time, often those stretches will come in. And it's not that we're doing not a good job. We just, one, don't want to burn that plastic. Two, the way that the nylons actually react to heat is in a very subtle way. And so we can certainly stretch and punch boots. Certain carbon fibers we cannot obviously stretch, but a lot of stretches and punches can happen. Be wary of maybe the brand of boot that you wear. There is a brand out there that will not warranty ski boots if they have been stretched or punched. So make sure you check with your boot fitter if you are concerned about warranty issues. Last but not least, these liners pack into absolutely nothing over time. You can be super attached to your boots. Maybe they've taken you on some really rad adventures around the world. Maybe they're the first boot. Touring boots are also extremely expensive to invest in, so they're not necessarily something that we want to keep replacing. ZipFit has created this really awesome GFT liner. At the back of the liner, there's a little neoprene disc that helps with articulation. So I will admit and say it does reduce some of the range of motion available in that hike mode. But overall, it's not too bad. And you're getting that classic zip fit snugness and feeling. For me, with some of those really petite footed customers, I'm straight away getting them into this zip fit GFT liner, just to give them a little bit more hold in their touring boots. Intuition makes some touring specific liners as well that have a little articulation and neoprene at the back. So there is, when there's a will, there's a way. And yeah, there are ways to keep your shells for longer, compared to having to just go through and do the full replacement, go through all stretches, punches, and whatever else again. By just changing the liner, often you're going to significantly improve that fit. Um, that is what I have from a slide perspective. I think I can see in my corner that we have a little Q&A. Um,
We
all
do.
right.
We do.
We've got
Let's see the
planning. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, there's a couple questions that are really focusing on some of these colder expedition type trips and the ski boot that you might recommend for that. Um, so maybe we'll start with that. Like if I'm going to Denali and I'm gonna be on skis for a bit and drag a sled for a bit, and then maybe wear crampons too, and it's super cold up near the Arctic Circle. Like what are your thoughts on the right choice for that one?
Yeah. I used to work a lot with our sweet, sweet angel badass Hillary Nelson. My insoles have been on Everest and all sorts, and boot fits have been on all sorts of missions around the world, and I treasure that woman with all of my heart. But she was someone who had more boots than you could poke a stick at. And what we did do for her going on these really big missions is that we would put an Intuition to a Pro liner into her zero G, or at one stage before the zero G actually came out, into her Cochise boots. But she did size up, yes, for expedition boots so that she could put the full Tour Pro liner, the super thick, I think like 12 mil one, into her touring boots so that she was a lot warmer. She could walk around then in those liners as well as what she kind of chose to do. She also used boot heaters on her missions, or heated socks as well, when those became available to her. So, yes, in the right circumstance, totally size up, but make sure you mitigate that sizing up with a thicker liner. Um, in terms of naming names of the brand that does not allow for warranties, this may be something that has changed, compared to what used to be up until like a couple of years ago, but I would certainly approach it with caution. Was Scarpa was not warranting boots that had plastic modifications. If it was in there, I think like 2 year warranty period. That being said, a lot of the time with folks who I would work on their Scarpa boots with, I made this very clear, and I kind of made it clear to anyone anytime I stretch and punch a boot, it's going to forever change the boot. It's going to forever change the plastic. I'm confident in the temperature that I'm going to, heat the boot to so that it doesn't crack. And I'm always going to be more conservative than less. And so folks will, be cautious of that. I need to update my knowledge as to whether or not Scarpa will warranty a boot that has been stretched within that two-year period, but feel free to do a little research on that. This is another two questions. Different sequences to put your boots on to get a consistent fit. Oh, I have lots of opinions on how to buckle boots. Do I ever? I am going to argue and say that the most important buckle on a ski boot, if you have buckles on your boot, is this buckle here in the upper cuff, second from the top. The reason being is that this buckle here closes both portions of plastic on your ski boot. and it's actually going to push you into the heel counter, which is where, from a foot standpoint, that's where we get our grip and hold within the confines of the boot. So when we're actually locked in with the ankle like this, I do not care what you do with these buckles across the top of the foot, as long as you're not cutting off circulation. And some people like the upper cuff buckle to be a little bit more loose because they can feel they get better flex and drive. But if there is one buckle to do, it is this buckle. And in all honesty, that is the one that I buckle first because it's going to pull your heel to the back of the boot. If you slide your foot into the boot and you typically we're going to end up with our toes more to the front. If you straight away do these buckles down, you're going to just be buckling your foot more forward into the boot. So, I like to do a couple of knee bends to flex my heel to the back. I'm not a heel tapper because I have sensitive knees, but wriggling your heel to the back of the boot and then getting second buckle from the top or kind of the buckles that work in this area here. If it's a three-piece boot, say, or the Dynafit Radical Pro, like the strap that comes across there is like the most important buckle. So that's my opinion. Feel free to argue with me because everyone's got opinions and you're totally entitled to them. The next question of this, is it critical to take out your liners, footbeds, after skiing? I prefer to not pull liners in and out of ski boots, purely for the fact that I really like my knuckles and they have been battered and bruised a ton, and I use a boot dryer. If you've had any form of boot work done to your liners, you might find you do not want to pull that liner in and out because some of that padding will move over time. But because we perspire a little bit more, because we're so much more physically active while we're skiing, I would highly, highly recommend some form of boot dryer to use to dry out your boots. If you're, say, using an Intuition liner or a zip fit, because a lot of the time folks using those liners will do like race entries, so like liner on and then in the shell. If they come out when you're pulling the boot out, keep them out, let them dry that way. Make sure you buckle your boots closed of an evening. But that would be my kind of recommendation of keep everything in the boot and use a boot dryer because one, save your hands. Two, it just keeps the liner a little more intact. Um, yeah,
There's
thanks.
there's one more question in the chat. Emily's curious about just any more recommendations to reduce heel lift or rubbing, other than getting your boots adjusted or experimenting with socks.
Um, Heel lift can sometimes happen because you might actually be quite tight through your ankle range of motion. And so you might not have the physical ability to flex your ankle without lifting your heel up. So having a boot fitter kind of check your alignment. You might maybe need a wheel heel lift on your boot zepper, your boot board, to actually make up for that geometry. So I hate to say you might need to go see a boot fitter. It might be something as simple as a heel lift or on your liner, a couple of L&J bars around the back of the heel here. I'm a little picky with teaching boot fit school and trying to encourage people to always make sure they bevel the edges so that when you stick a little pad onto a boot, it just adheres a little bit more smoothly. Don't be afraid to put some Gorilla Tape or whatever on top so that it maintains its positioning.
Nice.
Um, yeah.
Nice. Well,
Um,
that's
yeah.
that's all the questions we have now. I'm gonna show a couple final slides here, and feel free to put any more questions in the Q&A um, I while we go out to our closing slides. Here we go. This is our second to last Tuesday night education series. We're going to skip a week, and our last one will be on February 24th. That's with some avalanche safety tips, especially for climbers, from Black Diamond. So tune in again with us in 2 weeks on February 24th. And then lastly, our area is a nonprofit, and we bring all this content and these experts to you at no charge, and all the support you can give to our efforts and our mission are always appreciated. Grab that QR and all everything helps. So thank you so much for your support. And yeah, there we go. We'll pop out of those slides and stop this share
To
and
the
see.
person who asked, am I still boot fitting in Colorado? I am not. I am working in Park City, but I'm working on actually creating a custom fit center out of a shop called Rendezvous Run. So right now we're working a lot on running shoes and Nordic shoes, but I'm actually sitting next to my trusty Technica Pro tool for boot fitting, and I have all sorts of tricks and treats. But I'm always happy to answer questions and to give you advice. Via what to ask your boot fitter. So feel free to get in touch. A lot of people find me on Instagram and answer that way. That being said, I can sometimes take a wee while to respond.
Nice.
So find your local favorite boot fitter and pick their brain a ton, but always happy to advise.
Nice. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sam. It was super fun. Another great one. So appreciate you so much. And thanks, everyone. It was a good night. We're going to shut it down.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good night, everybody.